Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Economic Matters Committee meeting. Today is May the 12th. It is 6:30 p.m. I would like to start the evening with a call to order. We have Alderman Savage and myself. Alderwoman Finlayson is running a little bit behind. She may be able to join us. She may not. First item on the agenda. Can I get an approval of the agenda?
Yeah, I'd like to. I'd like to move approval of the agenda.
Excellent. And this is the point where we make our amendments to it?
I'd like to move that I'd like to make a motion to amend the agenda to remove AP 7-21, AP 8-21, and AP 11-21, and have those go to our next meeting, because I'm hoping we can get those nominees to at least, if not in person, to at least maybe Skype in or something where we can at least talk with them. And then I guess I'll just deal with that motion. And then, can I add to that motion removing AP 9-21 and AP 10-21 because they were incorrectly referred to this committee?
I will second your motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And Mr. Chair, can I just comment on that too? If in case the nominees are watching, I don't know if they are. We do appreciate your interest in getting on these boards and commission. We just want to make sure we give you time to be heard, and also we have some questions for you before we consider your nomination. But thank you again for your interest.
All right. Up next on the agenda is presentation with the comprehensive plan update with Dr. Nash and Mr. Eric Lashinsky.
Sorry, before you do that, under business and miscellaneous, you have to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
Oh, thank you.
I'll move approval of the minutes from, what's the date?
3/10.
March 10th.
From 3/10/21.
I will second your motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Now, skipping over the appointments, which are either sent to us erroneously or will be heard in person at our next meeting, either through their testimony live or through Skyping in. I'd like to get to ID 7721, our comprehensive plan update. Dr. Nash and Mr. Lashinsky, thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely. Go ahead. Well, thanks for the chance to give you an update here. And good to meet you in person. We've been starting to present to the various committees, city council committees. This is the second one that we're presenting to in kind of a work session. We had 2 work sessions with the Environmental Matters Committee already, and so our aim is to circulate to all the committees and present progress on the comprehensive plan that's relevant to that committee. I just want to start with an overview of the schedule, where we are in this, and Alderman Savage, a lot of this is going to look very familiar to you, but I did add some additional slides that I think will be relevant for this committee. So the schedule is unchanged from what we've been presenting recently in other forums. The top line, which shows us kind of coming to May, the end of May, we're planning to release draft goals, performance metrics, and recommendations for the comprehensive plan for public review, and we'll be presenting that in a few other forums. But the idea is to give residents a chance to see where we are and weigh in and get a pulse on how people think we're doing. So that's going to be released through the website, and we'll get word out accordingly. We're going to continue meeting with stakeholders, organizations, neighborhood associations, and basically just trying to continue receiving input. But we're working towards September, where we aim to release kind of a more coherent, concrete plan document, something that looks like the final comprehensive plan in sort of its format and that will also be released for public comment. So we don't know yet when we might go into an adoption process for this, but our main goal is really trying to get to something that looks like a formal plan document and make sure we get as much feedback along the way as possible. So lots of opportunities for people to continue commenting on this, and that's the most important thing here, I think. So I'm going to kind of give a brief presentation that's oriented towards economic matters. And what we have here is a much longer presentation with draft goals and recommendations and metrics for all of the chapters of the comp plan, and we can go to some of those, but I'm going to frame the conversation around some of the key questions I think relate to the economy here in the city. So the foundational themes.
Mr. Lashinsky,
Yeah.
I would like to ask that you also include one element that maybe you didn't consider traditionally part of our economy. Please cover anything that would be in regards to our housing policy, specifically with how we can... Specifically, getting away from single-family zoning exclusively.
We're definitely going to have a chance to talk about that. That's on the that's in the slide. So
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But I wanted to start with just these kind of foundational themes that we've been working with kind of from the beginning of the process that were really identified as of our times here, not just in Annapolis but around the country. These are issues that every jurisdiction is grappling with, and I think COVID has certainly reinforced the sensitivity to these issues here in Annapolis. We want to make sure that the comprehensive plan references back to these themes. From that, we've developed a structure for the comprehensive plan that's oriented first around the 9 elements of the comprehensive plan, 8 of which are mandated by the state. The only one that's not is arts and culture. So those are essentially chapters of the comprehensive plan on the left. And then we developed these 3 city visions that you see on the right: the thriving city, the functional city, the adaptive city, as a way to capture where we're going with the comprehensive plan, and different ways of seeing the city and aspirations for it. We developed the principles that you see below those major headings as a way to ground our goals and recommendations. And so everything that we do with the goals and recommendations should tie back to those principles. And so each chapter fits into one of those 3 visions, and each chapter will have its own goals, metrics, and recommendations based on that topic. So this is an example of what that looks like in terms of structure. I pulled one example from the municipal growth chapter, and that's a big topic for this evening. I won't go into the details here. It's mostly just the structure. Even though we're structuring this in kind of a conventional chapter format, there's going to be links between chapters that really underscore that I would say the most pressing issues of the city don't fit neatly within an individual chapter. These are just some of the pressing issues that we're spending time on in planning and zoning, and we need to find a way for these to be referenced throughout the document. Tonight, because we're talking here about economic matters, I want to focus on the thriving city, and in particular, this notion of inclusive economic growth. It's kind of a central principle to that vision of the thriving city. This is one way of thinking about inclusive economic growth. I certainly want this to be a discussion this evening. These are 3 areas that combine to kind of, I would say, make us a more inclusive place. You can't imagine people participating if they can't live here. You can't imagine participating in the economy if they can't get around the city without a car. And certainly people need access to the opportunities. So this is not an exhaustive diagram. I'm interested in how to improve on this or if there's things missing, but this is a start.
Mr. Chair.
Alderman Savage.
Eric, do you want questions now or at the end?
Let's, if it's possible, let's hold up. I
Sure.
should be done with these slides in 5 or so minutes, 5 to 10 minutes. The thriving city, just kind of expands on those principles with a little bit more definition. But Alderman Schendelmeyer, you mentioned housing affordability. That's certainly pretty key to the thriving city. We've been using the Social Vulnerability Index that was developed by the CDC to understand where our most socially vulnerable populations are in the city. This is something that's been conducted across the country, and here in Annapolis, this is what that looks like, where the darkest census blocks are most socially vulnerable based on those 15 metrics. And it's maybe not surprising if you understand the city, but it helps us to kind of ground how we invest in the city and make sure where we apply our policies are reaching these populations. So just, briefly, the growth comes up frequently in our discussions of the comprehensive plan. It's really I would say at the core of the comprehensive plan, this question about where and how do we want to grow. It's inevitably people take sides on it. I want to spend a few minutes just talking about what we mean by growth and trying to clarify that, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions and confusion about it. I think it's sort of inevitable that we are going to grow. We are not putting a wall around the city. People have properties here that they have the right to develop. I think it's really more about being proactive in determining what that growth should look like and mean. We talk about growth, we talk about the people that are going to enliven our city and the kind of development that will change our city for the better. It's important when you think about population in the city, think about real people. One example I use is, for folks who want to have a restaurant or a business in their neighborhood that caters to them, it's important also to think about the person who runs that business being able to live in the city and not commute from another place, Arnold or Edgewater, and what we need to do to sort of allow that to happen. This is just a sampling of the types of people that may be moving to the city. Certainly households will increase naturally, but it's just an idea of how we're going to grow. And with development, we certainly want to be more specific and nuanced in terms of where that development should happen and what it should look like. This is one example of a recent development that's under construction on West Street. I think it ties together a lot of the things that make, I would say, smart growth in the city. It's an affordable housing development, about 40 units. It's along what we've identified as a spine of our bike network, the extension of the Poplar Trail. It's close to a school that's just off the map, the Monarch Academy, and not far from Parole Elementary. There's a trail that was envisioned as part of the project that will run along a tributary to Weems Creek. There's an intersection improvement that was done as part of this project at West Street and Gibraltar. So a lot of the things that we would identify with, a good development in the city I think are embedded in this project. It's just one example and thinking about how we can get more of this, I think, is the question. A lot of folks have been, we present this kind of presentation to a lot of audiences, and people are really, in some cases, really wanting to see narrative. Like, what is the narrative that we've been developing for the comprehensive plan? I wanted to share an example of something that we've been developing a lot of narrative, and this one I think distills, I have a few slides I just wanted to read that I think distill kind of how we're approaching growth and land use in the city in this comprehensive plan. So if I may, this is sort of the end of my slides here, but Annapolis has grown up against geographic constraints that have mostly defined its boundaries for decades. For that reason, since the 1990s, the city's comprehensive planning has prioritized mixing land use through the planned renewal and, in some case, intensification of properties already within city limits. This is infill, and it can happen via improvements to vacant property or wholesale redevelopment of sites that become economically obsolete. The Annapolis community has learned from 30 years of practical experience blending use types and promoting infill and redevelopment. This development policy has resulted in revitalized properties and neighborhoods. More specifically, has brought about employment gains, grown the tax base, modernized infrastructure, created new green spaces, and improved the quality of the stormwater entering area waterways. When this plan refers to development, in the broadest sense of the term, these are the properties of change that are intended. Without development, these things do not happen within a city. The city has also learned that infill proposals can change the character of a place, provoke controversy, and create unnecessary costs to both residents and developers. This plan seeks to improve how infill and redevelopment is accomplished. It seeks to bring more intention and greater focus to ensure real estate development, in fact, contributes to the city's development. Of critical importance, this plan seeks to bring mixed-use infill proposals into alignment with the qualities of the neighborhoods where they are located. And finally, the Planning Commission has found that as the city has become more interconnected and complex, greater subtlety is needed to guide its development. For example, the same infill project that is cheered in one location because it enhances the community might well be vilified in another because it diminishes the community. When projects are advanced without deep regard for neighborhood differences, new buildings and sites do not develop the city, they weaken it. The city's current regulations are not quite designed to be sensitive to this understanding, which means that infill projects can comply completely with zoning standards and still adversely impact their surroundings and cause conflict. I think, thanks for letting me indulge there. I think, I just wanted to kind of clarify how we're approaching our land use and growth in the comprehensive plan. I think that passage kind of speaks volumes. We've certainly developed a kind of more formal growth projection for the city in terms of trying to anticipate how many more households we might have in the city by 2040. And this is a standard kind of forecast that comprehensive plans do to understand if we can accommodate that growth and whether we're set up for it. I'm just going to this is the end. We've essentially looked at the trends in population growth for Annapolis and the region, and we've charted those, and we've basically developed a forecast for households between 2020 and 2040 that is reasonable and sort of in line with how we've been growing as a city. One thing that's kind of specific to this comprehensive plan is that we want to be kind of forward thinking in, there's a percentage of that population growth that we've sort of we could already anticipate in our pipeline development that's either under review or already permitted. And that accommodates a certain amount of population. But then there's additional population that we will likely accommodate, and we want to find policies that can create more affordable housing options for those households. And that's sort of I guess that's the way in which our projection is sort of aligned with the policy objectives of the comprehensive plan, is that we recognize that, if we take on additional households, that there needs to be a way to accommodate those folks in a way that is in keeping with the patterns of development in the city today. So,
Can you go back to that previous slide,
yeah,
please?
sure.
Not that one, the one you showed right after that.
This
There we
guy.
go.
Yeah, this is kind of where I wanted to end. I think we've talked quite a bit about the mixed use as a kind of proactive strategy for positive fiscal impact to the city, but also this is more about the fiscal impact. But the part that's not here is just the kind of pragmatic efficiencies of resources that we achieve when you situate land uses next to one another that are on top of one another, that are compatible with each other, and you really minimize the infrastructure costs. You incentivize shorter trips between places. This is the essence of being kind of economical with our development pattern. So that's kind of one of the takeaways here.
So, according to that slide, we are spending an obscene amount of, or we are not getting a return on our investment by any means with that very large parking lot in front of the Walmart, but the downtown walkable area with more mixed use seems like we're getting a lot of bang for our buck. Am I interpreting that correctly?
That is right.
We should really do a good job expanding that option.
Yeah. I mean, that's a central theme in the comprehensive plan is being clear that there are places in the city that are not performing well, not just fiscally, but environmentally. It's another, primary metric. The parking lot is that perfect example. It's there's some very oversized parking lots in the city. Yeah. So, we have, our growth goals. We go into recommended actions. I kind of wanted to stop here and just see if if you have thought. I mean, I did want to kind of go back to this idea of inclusive economic growth, because I think that's, it's a complex topic, and I think the city is not. I mean, we're not going to be able to do everything in this to make economic growth more inclusive. We have to work with the county. We have to work with the state. I mean, there's a lot of resources that are going to come from other places, but I think this is we talk about equity, and this is a pretty important topic for the city as we grow. I'd be interested in any thoughts you have on this.
Yes, Alderman Savage, I will let you start the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess, so my question is about this. Is this kind of a framework for how we're going to build a more inclusive economic growth, or is this a strategy, this chart represents a strategy for our general goals to improve and strengthen our economy? Like, I'm just wondering, because I'm just wondering, I guess, to reword that is, do you have a similar kind of framework for the general economic growth, or are you putting everything through this kind of framework that you have with the three circles?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think to the extent we have a general economic growth strategy, it is in we spent a lot of time talking about the mixed use as a way of leveraging our assets. I think this is kind of a subset of that, and I think
So it represents a philosophy for
Yeah.
inclusivity
Right.
in that. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any like chart or representing the broad approach to the economic improvements that you're looking for?
We don't have. I would say we don't have anything that I don't think we have anything that does exactly that.
Mm-hmm.
I think we could certainly use something in that regard.
Or we could go to the goals and talk about the specific performance measures
Yeah, that's a
that
good
we're
point.
using to get at that.
Yeah, but I think I think you're right. You're right, Dr. Nash, and that it's the real opportunity for setting a new narrative or philosophy, I guess, would be in the policy or the goal, the policy recommendations and goals that are going to be in the scattered throughout the report. But I think it would be good to have either a narrative or one of those summary charts. Like I know you have the summary chart for resiliency, but something like that for the economic part of it, because there's a lot to it, and I understand, and I'm glad that you're starting to define what you mean by growth more. And as I mentioned in environmental matters, there's a lot of baggage around what that means, especially in the environmental realm. It's going to be helpful to really define it for them, because I do still like the idea of framing it more in the sense of enhancement or improvement. I think is what it said last time, but I kind of like the enhancement part because I'm thinking of examples of like the giant shopping center, or I guess maybe a better example with the Caliente, the property that has Caliente Grill and Rita's on it, which granted is currently in the county. So it's growth in the sense that if we do annex that, but I guess what I'm getting at is that complex, it's not that, I mean, I guess it could kind of grow in the sense that it could potentially make it into a mixed use that's integrated in with the Bay Village. But it's really, I think what people would really like, and I'm not, and I do think that would be a thing worthwhile exploring, but I think anything to really improve that property, because we have a number of properties on that part of the street. I'm sure Alderwoman Patel Charles has examples from her ward on West Street that really could use just that improvement, beautification. But I do also like where you're going with some of the, like, and the giant shopping center is a good example as well in terms of working in the environmental enhancements when you do redevelop that. And I guess you're still in the narrative you're laying out. That's what you, I think, are calling growth, right? It would be redeveloping that. Well, we wouldn't be doing it, but we'd be setting, I guess, the framework to allow the property owners to redevelop that facility to potentially create mixed use, and potentially, hopefully, take out some of that parking lot and put in green enhancement area, some kind of green enhancement, right? So is that kind of what
I think one thing that came up at the environmental matters, and I think we still have to develop, but it's been on my mind, is just this something that will clarify that there is a kind of there's a way of prioritizing sites for redevelopment. You know, it's not there's I know, you know, that you're not the only one who is concerned about developing greenfield sites. You know, and there's not that many left in the city, but we want to. I think we want to incentivize the places that are gray fields, brown. I mean, there's a few brown fields, but
Or at least underperforming economically.
yeah,
always plenty of those, I think, probably,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Just places that need reinvestment.
right,
Yeah.
right, and particularly where, you know, we have infrastructure in place that we can leverage. It's not just infrastructure you don't see, but transit.
Yeah, and I think be good to work in some of the, and I think we may have mentioned this with the sector studies, to work in some of the mixed use, that kind of, that approach, work that into some kind of these, I don't know if we're going to have growth opportunity areas or whatever you're going to call them this time around, kind of like what we had with the last comp plan, is to really do what we can to get some of these test projects that are really going to incorporate that, so we can point to them and get the council and the public comfortable. And maybe one thing that comes to mind is West Annapolis, I guess, because, and I think that's, you mentioned, I think the code, our planned unit development code, just from speaking to both of you and Mr. Smith, needs a lot of improvement, because I think over there, we have I think at least one property owner, a developer who owns a lot of properties over there, but it sounded like the staff wasn't fully enabled to really coordinate all of those as much as we would probably want to, or that staff would want to. And in the sense that, like, if they own so much property, could the staff point them to put in some kind of parking garage facility on one of the properties, thereby reducing the parking on the rest of their properties and allowing for more space, not only for environmental enhancement, but more space for the amenities that people want, the mixed use. So that's something I'd really like to get into in the future, is identifying how the specifics of how we can really improve the PUD and make that something that's going to work for staff and really work for us in terms of how we're going to implement this comprehensive plan.
Right, you're exactly right, because the code there was, the zoning districts there were preventing us from having the kind of leverage we would want to have to get those kinds of transformative changes in West Annapolis, just because of what the zoning happens to be there. So it is frustrating.
Yeah.
So that's why we're working on the West Annapolis master plan and focusing on that area. We intend to apply the lessons we've learned from that master planning exercise to other parts of the city. We're not doing the opportunity areas per se, but we are having some case studies from around the city.
Yeah, we're actually probably be releasing the outcome of this West Annapolis master plan pretty soon. We have a final draft of it that we're just kind of making some final tweaks to. But yeah, one of the real benefits of that will be exactly what you're describing. We've identified places that would make sense for shared parking, structured parking, places that would make sense for new open space areas that could be a public-private sort of arrangement. It's not a complete. It's looking at the commercial district of West Annapolis. We're not envisioning the whole complete area to change overnight, but it's being sort of strategic about the sites that could be providing more to the community and the broader city. And we met with community members a few times to kind of hear what they were looking for in that district. And so I'm excited that should be something that we can provides a guide for how other parts of the city could be reconceived, I guess, from a zoning perspective, and leverage the land assets and the streetscapes to a greater degree. And then this idea of the case studies, that's something we're going to be releasing at the end of the month too, a website where people can comment on these it's actually 5 sites. One is the Growls Shopping Center in West Annapolis, but it's already been sort of treated in that master plan. So the 4 others, we're really looking for input. One is the Bay Forest Shopping Center where the Giant is in Bay Ridge. Another is the intersection of Chinkapin and Forest and 665, where it's a challenging area in a lot of ways. But we were interested to see people's thoughts if properties were consolidated over time, what types of uses would make sense there, and alternate ways of getting through that area. And then the shopping center at Old Solomon's and West Street, where the dispensary is, and is, it's kind of a gateway to the city, importantly. And then the final site is the city-owned, soon-to-be former Public Works facility on Spa Road. And we're not going to be providing all the answers in the comprehensive plan, but we think it's important that these sites could demonstrate what's possible, if we reconceive these sites in ways that benefit the city better. And so it's a way of demonstrating the values of the comprehensive plan and providing some scenarios that could guide future development. So we'll have a website where people can kind of learn about these sites and provide input. I'm excited about that.
I'll take a break there, Mr. Chair. But just to remind you, Mr. Wisniewski, if you could make sure you speak in the mic, because I want to make sure they can hear you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Alderman Savage. So I'm assuming you guys are going to go in front of the housing committee later, so I'll save my duplex, multiplex lines of questioning and rants at that time, but prepare for that. For me, could you go back to slide 25, please, where I asked the blatantly leading questions of why I thought this was a good idea?
This thing?
Yes. So one of the things that I noticed on the downtown mixed use slide and in other successful mixed use and renovations is it has a wider sidewalk and the storefront is right on the sidewalk and parking is in the back versus the Walmart, which is a very large parking lot in front, and then you have the store, and that large setback makes it more intimidating for pedestrians to go in and really browse and see around the various stores in front. So they're spending less time in and out, they're more time in cars, reducing our traffic or increasing our traffic problems. In this plan, is there any incentive to encourage our businesses or redevelopment of things to bring these storefronts right up to the curbside or increase our sidewalk space so that way we can potentially get more pedestrians out there, get them walking and actually engaging and seeing in our businesses at a higher rate than the traditional suburban sprawl development?
Yeah, so the comprehensive plan there will be recommendations that speak to changes to our code that would do. It's not going to provide the specifics that you're talking. I mean, it's going to speak to the value of complete streets, and I mean, there's elements that I think are going to highlight what you're talking about, but it's not. I would say it's not going to provide that level of detail. It'll sort of say, well, the city needs a complete streets policy that would do this, that would have adequate sidewalk width, street trees, crossings, street furniture, these kind of things that are kind of missing in a lot of our streetscapes. We're constrained, in many places. So that would show up our transportation chapter. In our land use chapter, the way that would be addressed is in kind of talking about the benefits of mixed use. There. I don't want to say every mixed use development is going to be, with no setback, but I think that, we're going to be talking about the ways of creating that kind of vibrant sidewalk environment that, I think is successful downtown and in parts of Eastport and some parts of West Annapolis currently, Annapolis Street, sort of what's involved in that. But I think, the kind of recommendations are going to be to look at how we could be kind of more specific in our guidelines for future development.
Right. We'll be looking at how we can build on the things in our zoning code that are successful, because there are parts of the city where we do get good design. If you look at Inner West Street and compare it now to 30 years ago, there's been a transformation there.
Yeah.
And that's largely because of the Inner West Street sector study and the public dollars that were put towards improvements there. And if you look at the design, we're very careful about how the streetscape interplays with the building and the facades and how those are articulated in a human scale. And I think we've been pretty successful along Inner West Street. We'd like to continue that to Outer West Street. We'd like to continue the things that have made downtown so successful, the mixed use, the retail on the bottom, living above, and duplicate those in parts of the city that haven't had the opportunity to develop like that. So that we're looking to both build on what we have and also clarify and enhance new parts of the city and the zoning code that applies to those areas.
Now, one of the hurdles preventing us from doing that on Outer West Street is, or Upper West Street, or whatever the title is the state having control over that area up until Gateway Circle, correct?
It's a state right away from the circle out. Yeah.
Is there anything that we are doing as a city government, like internally, to try and encourage them to let us control a road that is not doing the job that they think it is doing, i.e. moving cars A to B as quickly and efficiently and safely as possible?
Well, even if they continue to control the road, which I suspect the city will not be too eager to take that over from the state, we can still do a lot by controlling access points through good design and providing opportunities for wider sidewalks and more pedestrian, make it more pedestrian friendly. Even if the state continues to manage that road, there's still a lot of opportunities we have there. So if we control the design of the buildings that front on the road, in some ways it's less important that the goals of the State Highway Administration differ from our goals, because we will have control over how people get in and out of sites, which is so important for making roads safer. And but it also has so much to do with the design of a development.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to bring up this slide because, kind of to your point about having our code be more deliberate about what we'll get in terms of that streetscape experience. That BCE zone that you see in the upper right, I mean, that is a zoning district that exists on Upper West Street today. And it has led to some buildings which I think are really exemplify what we're looking for. Not a lot of them, but we do see some examples today, such as that one. And that's the business corridor enhancement zone. And so within that zone, we have urban design guidelines that provide kind of DNA for what we're going to get, and we want to do more of that. So just kind of piggyback on what Sally was saying. It's even if we're not sort of controlling the roadway, what's happening from the curb inward is something that we can be more vigilant about, and that zoning district is, and I think it's doing what we want it to do currently, but it's just not as much properties have turned over, but,
right. There's other incentives like small parcels. There's shopping centers there that they've been doing okay. Yeah. They're not really incentivized to redevelop because they're bought and paid for. So there's market forces at work too, but that's why we have to tinker with the zoning to make sure the incentives are right to encourage people to go for it and make the change.
I think it's also a little bit of a chicken and egg thing sometimes, where the new development that comes in that the city can work with a property owner and lead to kind of an improved streetscape environment, that then brings more people to the street, to the sidewalk environment, encourages more pedestrian activity, more people who need to cross the street. And so the needle can move at the state level, when there's more activity on the street. I mean, I think we work closely with the state and the county on, the roadways that they manage in the city. And I definitely started to see some consensus on some of the changes that need to happen. I mean, the county just released a parole mobility study that is pretty forward thinking, I think, in kind of the changes that should happen in the greater parole area, not just within the city, but the county's town center there. Everything in that plan is pretty consistent with what we'd like to see. We reviewed it, so I guess I'm optimistic that things are going to change. But
any more questions?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah. So one question I have, my computer wakes back up, is integration with the maritime zones, because obviously, as we're learning through the Maritime Task Force, the maritime industry that's what keeps us as a maritime town. So it supports all the sailors and maritime power boater, everybody, all the boaters who come visit us, and the tourists too. The industry supports them, be it the actual production industry or the commercial maritime, and even some of the restaurants who are out there. So I think, a lot of the improvements. So I'd like to see that maritime industry be given a lot of emphasis in this. And I do know you're going to be integrating, I'm imagining anyway, the task force recommendations. But I'm wondering if there are other things besides, because the task force did have, it had relatively broad, but it also a kind of focused approach. Are there other things you think that they're not focusing on that we could be including in here in terms of ways to enhance that industry overall? Behind creating the maritime zoning because it didn't fit in. But is there an opportunity to kind of adjust that zoning or make it some other opportunity so when it does come time for redeveloping that property, that it's going to be more aligned with the maritime, the goals for the maritime zoning? And on a related note, in Ward 7, I mentioned, I think I've mentioned this to you in the past, I may not have, but at the very end of Bemba Beach Road, there's that large green, it's an open space right now, which is grass with one single, I think the Bemba family matriarch lives there in a tiny house. And I think the house might be carved out, but I think a good portion of that property is in the maritime industrial zone. And so I guess my question, and again, I think I've mentioned this before, but would it be worthwhile to kind of make that maybe not an opportunity area, but an enhancement area. Because what I'm getting at is I think if we can really identify a need that exists for the maritime industry, since that's kind of a blank slate, can we drive something there that we really think is needed for that industry without working against some of the already established companies or uses that are there? But because I think this would be a good time, because that might come up. This might become an issue in the next 10 years under the scope of this comp plan, and I think it might be good to give that some more consideration.
It's true. That's a good point. Yeah.
But again, I think something like that for the redevelopment opportunities, like of the Tecumseh. So, do you think that's something that might be able to be incorporated in the comp plan, or in some other method? I'm not sure.
Well, we do have a future land use map that, I'm actually not 100% sure how that site.
Because we kind of do, you're doing that with the giant shopping center, right? In the sense that I think you're essentially identifying that as mixed use and green opportunity. But some of these other, like just that one property as an example in the Maritime, I'm not sure what you have that listed as on your future
it's hard
land
to
use
tell.
map.
It might be an environmental enhancement area currently, this light green, but that I'm not 100% sure.
Well, and that's certainly a viable.
Yeah.
That's certainly something to consider too. Is do we need to expand maritime there, or should it be used as environmental enhancement, or both?
I know that one thing that our colleague Steve Rice, economic development manager, is working on it as part of the Maritime Task Force report is essentially, a strategy for business development. Building out the ecosystem of our maritime industry here in Napa. What is missing? Who should we try to attract? Be more proactive about going to the trade shows and sort of pitching Annapolis to potential companies that would locate here. And so I think part of that is looking at those gaps in the industry that could kind of complement what we have here. But I think we're not. Although we just started working on the report, I don't think we're going to get down to sort of that like granular parcel level. In terms of. We might with like water access opportunities where we want to be kind of specific and strategic about where those investments should happen. That could be where the expense could be shared by a property owner as part of incentives. But I don't think in terms of like business, land use for commercial, we're not going to be that specific. But I think that's a good point.
I think that's a wise move. But I guess what I'm thinking of is, we had those growth opportunity areas in the last comp plan, and they really have, especially I think in my ward, especially directed how the development's going to go. The Bay Village is an example. We've been able to use that as leverage to even drive the direction of the county. What we're trying to with the Lidl redevelopment. And also, I think we've used that with the Bay Village Phase 2 and obviously Phase 1. And I think that's been beneficial to the community. But if we didn't have that, I don't think we would have necessarily been able to get what we're hopefully going to get, or at least maybe not as easily. So I'm just wondering if there's a similar kind of model we could use for maritime. And maybe even just purely economic enhancement areas, because I think maritime is one challenge. But the other challenge, which you already mentioned, is inclusivity. Is right. We have to bring in some of these get growth, economic growth in some of these sub communities. But that too, I think, how are we going to identify those communities that need to be targeted in that sense to help make it more inclusive?
I mean, one of the things that's kind of coming to mind this is a good time to be talking about this because we literally have just been sort of mulling the outline for the task force report. Early on in the task force, we were definitely talking about, what contributes to a healthy maritime commercial ecosystem, and we could have some diagrams in the report that kind of show, this is sort of the cluster in Ward 7. These are the kind of things that already exist. I'm just thinking about some simple graphics that kind of help to explain the context and what could complement that. And that might, without being super specific as to property boundaries and such.
Yeah.
And that could be.
Well, yeah. And I'm just, thinking out loud with all this too, with the Greenway plan, that is going to have, well, I'm guessing in many cases, actual parcel boundaries. Granted, that's not a land use change, but it is kind of a change in emphasis, and it allows staff to drive things in a certain direction without going super specific, I suppose. And it doesn't obviously change the entire use for parcel, but it may be part of the parcel. But yeah, so I think there's certainly a good balance to try to find, because I think we've seen even with the county plan and with the county plan in the past anyway, it's been bogged down by all these specific zoning changes, right? And we certainly don't want that to happen with this comp plan. But I think we found a fairly good balance with that in the past. I mean, obviously, I think with one thing that would have helped with the Parkside Reserve of Quiet Waters would have been, I think, to incorporate more of the environmental enhancements in that opportunity area from the get-go. I know some of it was to a limited degree, but we clearly, I think, weren't able to use that as effectively as I think we would hope to, and to meet that goal. I'm sorry. I'm just thinking out loud here. Hopefully, this is helpful to get you thinking about some of our concerns.
I have one more question based on this map you guys put in front of us. I really like that map on the right more than the map on the left. But I'm wondering if you could maybe explain why you chose the brown areas on the map, also known as the mixed use. What made you decide to put them there and not in other places in the city? Yeah.
I guess we have another slide in another presentation that actually goes into a little bit of that. The short answer is that these are places that we think could perform better for the city and surrounding communities in various ways. I think not just fiscally, but environmentally, the types of uses that are there, and that people that might have services and retail that could benefit adjacent communities.
Where's that feedback from?
Is that what I sound like?
We're still getting it?
I think we're good.
Awesome.
Yeah. So, I guess the common denominator is that these are all on major thoroughfares, I would say, or the large majority of them. So transit routes, easily accessible. There are some that are kind of tucked into neighborhoods, but the majority of them are on major streets.
It's
we're
also
trying
just most of our commercially zoned property.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, it's a good question, because if you compare the maps, the mixed use on the left is incredibly small just on West Street and downtown.
Yeah.
Right. Sort of we're expanding it to other commercial areas in the city.
Yeah.
Let's see. So, I mean, one of the starting points is just that we have 31 zoning districts for a relatively small city. And, you know, we recognize that some of these could be consolidated. And so we're trying to simplify the zoning code in a way that will yield more predictable results. That's part of it. But yeah, the commercial zones, the B1, B2, B3, and the professional kind of office zones, P and PM, those are the ones that I think are most commonly, proposed to ultimately switch over to something that's more specifically mixed use. Now, these are not zoning maps; they're land use maps. There's a difference, but we try to have the zoning elicit the kind of uses that we want, and
they might be all mixed use, but that doesn't mean they're going to be the same kind of mixed use. Like for West Annapolis, we're developing 4. I'm lobbying for 3 different kinds of mixed use, depending on if you're on a corridor, if it's more of a village kind of feel like Annapolis Street, or is it somewhere where it would be more fitting to have a little bit more height and bulk on your buildings, so like closer to Rao. So there's going to be nuances within the mixed use. It's basically just signaling that we think we should allow, we don't think we should segregate uses as strenuously as we've done in the past. I mean, we still have a lot of residential only areas, but we're open to looking at how we can mix those a little bit more.
And, on the opposite end of the spectrum are places like, the Watergate Apartments or Admiral Farragut Apartments on Hilltop Lane. These are higher. They're higher density for Annapolis in terms of the, housing that they provide currently. If they were to redevelop or renovate in the future, there's an opportunity, I think, for some small scale retail to serve those residents. That's the idea there. So there might be 90% residential, 10% retail. That would be the mixed use expectation. So it's not saying that those are going to become town centers or something like that. It's really not that. That's not the intent. But the details are important. I think as focused as we are on creating new housing options, there's value obviously in retaining commercial spaces and incentivizing the historic model of retail at the ground floor with residential above is something that is done well in Annapolis, but we don't have a whole lot of it these days. And so in how the zoning code is written, we need to, I think, try to retain that balance. So the MX zone in Inner West Street, I think, has been very successful, and that's kind of yielded what we see today. So we do have some models.
And we are keeping the industrial districts because those are very small, and I think there's value in protecting those for that use, which isn't really compatible with residential, and there's 2 different industrially zoned areas, and they're really the most affordable parts of the city for any business, but especially those kinds of businesses that can't always find spaces in other parts of the city. So we are keeping those as is.
That is all the questions that I have. Thank you so much for this presentation. I'm very excited about the prospects of the plan. Turn on or talk closer to it. All right. Thank you again, and I'm very excited about this plan.
Great to hear.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Moving on
Thanks.
into other items on the agenda today. We were not able to get our representatives from the Economic Development office, Mr. Rice and Ms. Stewart, in to talk today. I have asked Takia to print their report out. Alderman Savage, I'm giving you a copy. And they have also emailed it to us. Some of the highlights that we have coming in that I'm very excited for is new, expanding, or relocating businesses. We have 5 new businesses that are coming to our city, and we have 8 businesses that are expanding or relocating. Despite the economic hardships the pandemic brought, it seems that we are chugging along economically in this city. Unless there is anything else, Alderman Savage? All right. In that case, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I will second. So concludes the meeting of the Economic Matters Committee. Thank you.